This is a PSA video addressing the needs of children in our society. I'm going to start out by talking about stress and ACEs and kind of let the conversation flow from there. So according to TED 2015 in the video, How Childhood Trauma Affects Health Across a Lifetime, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences which include any type of abuse or neglect. Parents also contribute to the development of ACEs, especially if the parent has a mental illness, a substance abuse disorder, or is incarcerated, going through a divorce, or is a domestic abuser. ACEs are way more common than you think. Approximately 64% of the population experiences at least one ACE, while 12.6% experience 4 or more. But how do ACEs and toxic stress affect the developing brain? According to the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University, excessive stress weakens the brain by activating the brain's stress response systems too often or at inappropriate times, like when the stressor isn't even present. And this leads to impairments in behavior, learning, physical health, and mental health. But how do we know that stress has this effect on the brain? Neuroimaging technologies have advanced enough to study the human brain. From Sousa 2010 in The Mind, Brain, and Education, Neuroscience Implications for the Classroom, these tools include CT scans, PET scans, fMRIs, EEGs, and out of this list, fMRIs and EEGs can be used on children's brains, since they don't use any radioactive material. fMRIs use a magnetic field to measure localized changes in blood oxygen in the brain, and it can determine the timeline of activities and connection within the brain. EEGs study electrical brain activity by placing electrodes on the scalp. It can determine where the signals originate from. So we discussed how the brain is studied, but we did not get into the specifics of the biology behind stress. So how does stress biologically affect the brain? Well, according to Siegel 2012 in his book The Developing Mind, How Relationships in the Brain Interact to Shape Who We Are, when activated, the HPA axis facilitates the release of a stress hormone called cortisol. When this stress response activates frequently, high levels of cortisol is released into the brain. But why does this matter? Well, cortisol harms the hippocampus, an area responsible for memory functions, by inhibiting neural growth and damaging the cell receptors in this area. But don't worry, there are some protective factors that prevent the child from suffering the damages of stress. The Carnegie Corporation of New York, 1994, states that 2 of the greatest protective factors are dependable caregivers and community support. So how did these things protect children? Well, according to Siegel, 2012, from his book, The Developing Mind, the caregivers define the child's environment, and that ultimately affects the child's mind and behavior. Caregivers who are sensitive and appropriately respond to their child's signals will promote secure attachment. Growing up in a safe and secure environment will influence the children to seek emotional closeness with others. However, there are also insecure attachment styles that affect children's behavior in different ways. Avoidant attachment in infancy is characterized by a lack of proximity-seeking behavior and emotional distance. Caregivers who are emotionally unavailable or distant contribute to the development of this style. Ambivalent attachment, however, is the exact opposite. Infants with this style seek excessive closeness to their caregivers and are very anxious in relationships. Caregivers who are unpredictable in responding to their infant's needs contribute to this style. The last insecure attachment style is disorganized attachment, which is characterized by the infant's random, disoriented behavior when the caregiver is present. Caregivers who respond to their infants in a scary or frightening way contribute to the development of this style. All of these styles are classified as insecure attachment, and they may also play a role in the child's stress response. And this information comes from Siegel's text as well. Now, you might be wondering how infants understand their caregiver's emotional sensitivity or lack thereof. I mean, they're babies. They have 0 social experience when they're born. Like, how are they going to know what certain emotions look like when they haven't seen any before? Well, according to Siegel, all humans are born with the ability to interpret the meaning behind facial expressions and eye contact. And this ability is innate because it is an important survival tool that has helped our species thrive throughout evolution. We have specialized neuronal groups in the amygdala and orbital frontal cortex that respond to faces and facial expressions. So this explains why children can interpret emotions at a very young age. Although we have the ability to interpret emotions from a young age, that doesn't mean we know how to control our own emotions. In a video by Densley, 2015, called Daniel Goleman Explains Emotional Intelligence, Dr. Goleman explains the development of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a broad profile that describes a person's emotional capacities, such as self-awareness, empathy, and self-control. It's ultimately learned over time and it matures as people age, and that's why children need more assistance with impulse control and emotional awareness than someone in adulthood. And I know we've been talking a lot about the negative impacts stress has on the brain, but stress is actually a normal part of being a human being, and it must be dealt with at some point in life. One of the benefits of stress is that it makes us more social. According to TED 2013, in a video called How to Make Stress Your Friend, oxytocin, which is a neural hormone that facilitates the brain's social instincts, is released by the pituitary gland during the stress response. And because of this, it influences us to seek relationship experiences. This explains why most children run to a caregiver for comfort when they're hurt or when they need help calming down after a stressful experience. Now, we've talked a lot about children and their home lives, but let's shift gear to children's educational needs. We are currently facing a crisis in our education system because we aren't focused on the right areas of development to maximize students' learning. See, most schools implement an instructional method that involves lots of reading and mathematical practice, but this doesn't work for every child. Teachers should understand that everyone understands information through multiple intelligences. According to Lane, multiple intelligence theory contends that every person possesses specific strengths that help them understand the world. These strengths are combined in various ways to carry out different tasks and solve problems. There are 8 types of multiple intelligences that a person can have. There's linguistic, which relates to language and word abilities, logical mathematical, which involves mathematical analysis, musical intelligence, which relates to being attuned to rhythm and sound, spatial intelligence, which allows people to think in terms of physical space, bodily kinesthetic, which involves movement, interpersonal, which emphasizes social interactions with others, intrapersonal, surrounding the idea of self-reflection, and the last one is naturalistic, which involves using nature to understand the world. Before we can implement MI into educational practices, young children must work on a specific foundational skill to help them move on in life, and that is language. Language acquisition must occur before kids enter school, and this happens through early social interaction. According to TED 2011, in a video called The Linguistic Genius of Babies, babies naturally acquire language by taking statistics on what sounds they're supposed to be paying attention to from their native language. And they determine this by listening to people in their environment. Once a child has acquired language, then they can move on to other skills that they'll use in school, such as reading. According to Sousa 2010 in the book Mind, Brain, and Education, an understanding of language is a necessary skill for reading acquisition. Brain systems involved with vision, hearing, and comprehension work together towards adequate reading, and with lots of practice and maturity, these areas facilitate automatic reading. New readers, such as children, decode each letter of the word when they read, and it's a very slow process, but proficient readers read words quickly and efficiently because they process the entire word as soon as they see it. Language and reading acquisition are also foundational for learning mathematics. According to Sousa 2010, our mental storage of numbers and accessing them require the capacity to recall symbolic names used during the initial learning process. In fact, learning the decimal number system occurs in 3 major phases. The first is learning how to read and write numbers in the system. Then they must commit memory of several basic number facts, like the multiplication tables. And finally, they can move on to learn algorithms used to compute equations. So to tie this all together, how can we support children in education? Well, according to TED 2007, in a video called Do Schools Kill Creativity with Sir Ken Robinson, our current educational system leaves little room for creativity. All schools care about is productivity. They value subjects that are supposedly preparing students for the workforce, like reading and math, and discourage kids from other subjects like art. Children are highly creative beings and they have vast amount of talent. We need to provide opportunities in school that will let them utilize their strengths and talents. The best way to support our children through development is through considering all the information I've provided in this PSA video and giving kids the chance to express their creativity.